The Jak and Daxter games were home to some of the most diverse and unique speedruns out there in 2012 and 2013. They had platforming elements with Jak's flashy moveset, traversing its vast worlds with its grounded or flying vehicles, fun combat sections with a variety of guns, and jetboarding, just to name a few. But that would all change one day with the discovery of the hover glitch. It revolutionized the games and changed how they were ran forever. A glitch so impactful it caused full reroutes to how some missions were done. How could a single glitch change the meta so drastically? Good afternoon and welcome to the story of the most game-changing glitch in Jak 2 and 3. This is the story and legacy of the hover glitch. Before we begin with today's video, I want to talk about the #1 fantasy RPG available for both mobile and PC, Raid: Shadow Legends. As a fan of old browser games on Battle.on like Adventure Quest and Dragon Fable, it's great to see Raid: Shadow Legends keep this old forgotten formula alive, and while they were at it, they cranked it up to an 11. After my first day of playing, I realized the amount of content there was to explore. A campaign mode with 12 chapters to fight through, all having impressive cinematics before and after each chapter. A large index with up to 400 champions to play through the game with. And when I reached level 6, I unlocked the Tavern, where I gave my man Crusader here a beer. He went to level 8 and started shredding everybody. Finally, a brand new game mode that was only recently released, Tag Team Arena. If you assemble a team of 4 players, you can go up against another team of 4 to battle it out in a best of 3. This game mode even has ranked, where special rewards are given out to players that finish in the highest end of the rankings. Use the link in my description and you'll get a bunch of stuff starting out as a new player, such as 50 gems, 1 energy refill, 100,000 silver, and 1 free champion, the Executioner, who comes in at level 60 from the start. You can find your rewards within the next 30 days, located in your inbox in the top right part of your home screen. Start today with Raid: Shadow Legends for free on mobile and PC with your acquired new upgrades. And with that, let's get back to the video. The speedrunning community for the Jak and Daxter games was relatively small in 2014. About 15 or so people were active in glitch hunting or running the games. One of those people happened to be me. On November 16th, 2014, a guy by the name of Unreal704 had stumbled upon a strange glitch in Jak 2, and had sent it to me through the YouTube private message system that YouTube removed in 2018, so unfortunately I can't show you what he sent me. But the video was titled Jak 2 Jetboard Hover Glitch. At the time, I was heavily invested in running another game, so my philosophy was that it was just another optimization to take a look at when I eventually came back to Jak 2. In hindsight, this was a huge mistake. I underestimated how much a single glitch could change a game, because that had never happened before with any of the Jak games up until this point. Unreal continued to forward the video to the rest of the community, and they were shocked. Usually in 3D platformers, it's common for glitch hunters to try and find a way to move through 3D space as fast as possible, both horizontally and vertically. At the time, the jetboard was already a very fast tool for moving through the world horizontally, but there were very few useful ways of gaining a lot of height quickly besides 2 instances in Jak 3. One was proxy jumping. By getting stuck in an area you're not supposed to be in, and then jumping or wiggling out, you can get sent upwards at massive speeds. This was used to skip the first section of Eco Mines and to skip a third of Palace Ruins. Another was Infinite Flight Glitch, which allowed Jak to gain a lot of height by cancelling each wing flap with the shield. This could be done until he ran out of light eco, so the term infinite only goes so far. This method was the best we had, but was still very slow and inefficient. Now, we've found the ultimate solution. The hover glitch allows Jak to infinitely gain height while on the jetboard. This, however, had no effect for Jak 1 since there is no jetboard in Jak 1, so all changes and discoveries are for Jak 2 and 3. Sorry Jak 1. The only issue at the time of the upload of the hover glitch video was how it worked. You see, Unreal wasn't actually sure how he managed to pull it off. His description said something about hitting X and mashing L1 to do a trick move at the same time, but it was something that needed more investigation. Soon enough, Unreal got added to a Skype group with Bloppy, Qatar, and Ababob, the community's finest glitch hunters at the time, to try and figure it out. In a collaborative effort, the hover went through a couple of inconsistent iterations until they finally put the puzzle pieces together. This was how you did it. When you jump and hit L1 while holding any of the 4 main directions on the analog stick, Jack will do a trick. If you jump and do a side trick but only hold the analog stick halfway left or right, the side trick can get animation cancelled by an up or a down trick. This time, you would need to hold the stick all the way up or down. After you've done the required 2 tricks in the same jump, if you continue to tap L1, the second trick can be performed an infinite amount of times. It also didn't take long to figure out that you could build up speed with the jetboard first, then initiate the hover. You could now gain speed and height very fast compared to any other technique prior. While the implications for runs were already obvious, there was one limitation with the trick that was glaringly obvious. You're completely locked into going in a straight line. This means for longer hovers you have to very carefully select the line you fly through the air with. If you miss your target, the best backup strat is to hover really far up into the air, take off the jetboard, and hope you can steer your way into your destination. Another small drawback we found out soon after is that you can't just spam L1 and you could just hover at ridiculous speeds. The hover will eventually drop if you try to hover too fast, or even too slow for that matter. But besides that, it was a very broken tool. It was a common saying that when jack runners face hardships, just hover over your problems. The reaction in the community was pretty mixed on the discovery. Some felt that the hover glitch dumbed down a lot of the otherwise difficult platforming and jetboarding sections by hovering over them, while others cherished the idea of a new discovery since the meta for Jak 2 and 3 had been fairly stale for quite some time. Some players quit running the games because the hover was an easy way out, or found the trick to be too difficult to learn consistently. On the other hand, numerous runners found it to be a welcome addition, as it revived the competition for the world record and warranted many top-level players to make a comeback. Since the discovery was so new and unlike anything we'd ever done before, the learning process wasn't as straightforward. These days, it's easy to look up a tutorial of some kind to learn how to do a specific technique, and after some practice, you can perform it with some and eventually full regularity. This time around, it was essentially banging rocks together, raw hours grinding it down until the consistency was there. A lot of people early on found the consistency to either be 50% or 90% of the time. The main issue was trick cancelling. If you moved the stick halfway to either side and pressed L1 once, then L1 again when moving up or down, you'd force the jetboard back to the ground. When learning the hover this way felt the most intuitive, and many people starting out end up doing it like this. Unfortunately for the runners, this only ends up working about half the time. You have to forcibly try to only press L1 once when moving the stick halfway left or right, and then keep it held when moving the stick up or down. I know from experience, I spent days trying to learn the hover with the wrong method when one day I woke up and it just clicked. Once the runners got a grasp of the hover, it was time for the creativity phase. How powerful could it be? Where could it be used? What missions can be skipped? Let us now take a look at what changed in the following months after the discovery of the hover glitch, starting with Jak 2, Any%. The most recent world record before the hover was found for Jak 2 Any% was set on November 11th of 2014, 5 days before the hover was found. It was set by an old Jak 2 legend who goes by DJ TomJack73 with a time of 1:13:15. TomJack was one of the first people to really get a good handle on the hover glitch, as well as another Jak 2 runner, Nitrovsky. Nitrof and TomJack would lower the record trading it back and forth by incorporating new skips that were now possible with the hover glitch. The world record a bit over a month later stood at 1:08:48 by TomJack and remained there for a while. How exactly did the hover cut off 5 minutes? Let's take a look. The first thing you need to know is that Any% consists of the last 40% of the game, since the first 60% is skipped with Mars Tomb skip. The skip involves going to Mars Tomb at the very start of the game to skip from 2% to 62% completion, aka a percentage warp. This meant that the tomb you choose to do first, either left or right tomb, was carefully thought out back in the day, since after the first completed tomb, you receive all the guns, health upgrades, and most importantly, the jetboard. Before the hover, you would complete all of right tomb the way the game intended you to by doing various memory and timing puzzles. Afterwards, you would go out of bounds in the main area and skip half of the left tomb right into the Daxter spider chase section with a jetboard jump. After the hover was discovered, it was found that you didn't need the jetboard to perform this jump. A precise roll jump was enough to do the trick. Once the jetboard was obtained, the entirety of the right tomb was skipped by hovering out of bounds and then into the tombstone puzzle room, the final puzzle of right tomb. Rescue friends at Fortress is the first mission after Mars Tomb and was also changed dramatically. Before the hover, you'd have to battle an onslaught of guards while pressing 5 buttons on the way to lower a laser barrier. This was especially difficult because there are times when guards can shoot you while you're jumping over to one of the buttons. If they hit you in midair, you get stunned and most likely will fall and die. The next platforming and jetboarding section is more or less done as intended, but in a fast manner. With the hover glitch, you can now completely bypass the opening button room with a chunk of the platforming section after. This version you're seeing on screen is the way it's done today, but back then, sometimes people opted for a hover bounce off a pipe on the wall for more speed and a better angle. This turned out to be harder and not faster in the end. Get Life Seed in Dead Town is another pretty huge change all around. The mission involves going into a Titan suit to fight enemies, carry blocks around, and breaking walls. The intended way the mission is supposed to end is for Jack to punch a pillar to lower a bridge to the old hut. A skip for the Titan suit was found pretty fast, as the loading trigger for the end of the mission is active once you enter Dead Town. You would jetboard around the right hand side of the area until you got to a platform close to the hut. You would then side flip to gain speed, and extended front flip into the loading zone. Extended front flipping was the most effective way to gain height on the jetboard before the hover, performed by high jumping, then hitting L1 to do a trick, and then a fraction of a second later R1 to do a front flip. The L1 press gives you just a tiny bit more height and distance over a normal front flip. That is how the loading zone was reached. With the hover, it's almost a joke. You almost right away hover from the ground up through a wall with no collision on one side. While the hut may appear to be absent, the end mission trigger is not, so you can just jump into it. Destroy eggs in Strip Mine was already a pretty easy mission. The level is laid out to be a huge obstacle course for the jetboard, but is easily skipped by climbing onto a bunch of rocks to reach the loading trigger at the top. Well, I kid you not, the new way involves this. Right as you come out of the portal, it's possible to hover up above you to hit the end mission trigger in less than 10 seconds. Easy money. Explore Palace was yet another run killer before the hover. The guards are pretty relentless and increase in accuracy the more they shoot. It was overall a difficult mission to do at a speedy pace while also not getting destroyed by the guards. Especially this part right here, with 6 guards shooting at you out in the open with no cover. This area would also be completely bypassed by hovering straight up in the throne room, and then entering the end elevator after falling for a while. This hover took a bit longer to implement than expected, since the game would crash if you triggered the Ashland cutscene in the throne room prior to skipping to the end. This was avoided by not going too far into the room, avoiding the cutscene altogether. This next one ended up saving about a minute. This is the mission before the boss fight with Crew. It's called Get Heart of Mar in Weapons Lab and was one of the hardest missions in the run. The guard placement is troublesome at almost every corner. There are conveyor belts all over the place, which makes combat and platforming harder. There's a couple of sections where robots are rolling around aimlessly, and if they roll into you, you take a hit. 4 hits and you're toast. And this game is very stingy with its checkpoints. You'll know if you've played it. Worst section of all is right near the end, where you need to spin valves to turn bridges towards where you need to go, while you're getting sprayed with a bullet storm from the other side. The hover method for this mission is so ridiculous it's hard to believe it actually works. You can start a hover from the exterior of the weapons lab and hover through the wall and through the ceiling. This is one of the longest hovers in the run. and you can use it to land in the final room of the mission, where 3 dispensers will spawn robots. It's shocking that the last area actually loads in, despite starting the hover from so far away. I'd say this one is a welcome addition, as it removed a huge run killer from the run. Perhaps I saved the biggest for last. Most of the skips I included earlier were found only a few days to a couple of months after the hover was found, and I wanted to keep it that way, but Underport skip was a must include. Found on the 13th of September 2015 by Dex and Vaser, the Underport section would be a changed place. This skip single-handedly skipped the entire first section of the level with the Titan suit. By hovering inside of the tower where the Underport begins, you can stand near the door and jetboard backwards, where you will then fall into the half-loaded Underport. The second loading zone needs to be hit for the whole area to load in, so you initiate a double side flip to gain a lot of speed, then barely scrape by the loading zone to the left of the airlock. You can then hover to the second part of the mission where you meet up with Sig. This skip saved about 1 minute and 40 seconds, one of the biggest skips this game has ever seen. So that's all for Jak 2 Any%. It's safe to say if you were good with the hover, a lot of these new skips made the run easier, besides the aforementioned Underport skip, which was a huge difficulty spike at the time. Even if the run was quote-unquote easier, there were still new things runners had to get used to. Mastering the consistency of the hover was still troublesome for a lot of people. A lot of these hovers are first try or bust, where if you miss, it'll most likely result in death. Good control over the jetboard to hover at perfect angles was now something runners had to perfect, and good knowledge of level layouts from an out-of-bounds point of view. If you thought Any% now being 5 minutes faster was a lot, you're in for a treat. Next up is Jak 2 All Missions, the category that was home to some of the largest skips ever for the game. Let's take a look at how the first 60% of the game changed. Jak 2 All Missions was not exactly the main focus for the community when the hover was discovered. The general consensus was that there's not much point in working on all missions before Any% was somewhat established. This didn't stop the man who found the hover, Unreal, from working on both at the same time. Unreal and another runner, Vaser, who I've mentioned previously, would collaborate together to find a bunch of useful skips for all missions, culminating in a big YouTube playlist with all the new discoveries. The best run with video before the hover was discovered is TomJack's 3:25:10 from October of 2014. After the hover, Vaser would achieve a 3:17:29 in January and 3:09:31 in February, a huge cut by 16 minutes. Obtaining the jetboard in Jak 2 All Missions has always been a bit odd. At the 30-minute mark in the run, you go to the stadium to do the tutorial mission for the jetboard. After completing the tutorial, you're supposed to do a points challenge by doing tricks with the jetboard. You can actually leave the mission partially unfinished with the use of some glitches. First, a clever clip through a glass barrier, now with a hover. After the points challenge, you're supposed to return the jetboard back, but it's faster if we just borrow it for the next 20 minutes of the run. We do eventually return the jetboard to the stadium because it is required to end the mission to progress the story. The jetboard does become permanently obtainable, however, later in the run, right before the mission Catch Scouts. In the first trip where you're borrowing the jetboard, a ton of missions are vastly different. The first one is Destroy Eggs at Drill Platform. The intended way you're supposed to beat the mission is to get inside 3 different turrets scattered across various locations to shoot the metalhead eggs off the wall. This is essentially what TomJack did in his 3:25 before the hover was found. In Vaser's 3:09, he hovered to the second turret right away and triggered a small glitch with the mission flags. When you begin the mission with the second turret first, the game assumes the next turret you get into to be the last. This means you can travel to the third turret or back to the first, and you'd skip one of the turret sequences. Vaser went to the second one and then to the third one in his run, but it was later discovered that traveling back to the first turret was faster. Another pretty simple but big time saver was skipping all of the vertical climbing in the mission Find Pumping Station Patrol. You would usually have to platform your way up to the top, but the fight alongside Ashlyn against the metalheads at the summit can be started almost immediately after entering the pumping station. This next skip was almost universally praised by casual players of the game. Due to the brutal nature of some of these missions, it was common to be stuck because of the ruthless and unforgiving checkpoint system. It was also one of the absolute largest time savers to come from the hover. The infamous mission in question is known as Destroy Ship at Drill Platform. As the mission starts, you're supposed to hop into another turret to kill 40 Crimson guards that are flying around. After that, another turret. This time you face off against the first phase of the supply ship. And then the third and final turret where you get to destroy the supply ship. If you die at any point, you've almost certainly lost too much time to continue. These rail sections took maybe a minute and a half to 2 minutes each, and that's where the savior, Unreal, came to the rescue. Unreal managed to find a skip for the first 2 rail shooter portions of the level with a hover. In his YouTube video, he demonstrated that you can get over to an out of bounds part you're not supposed to be at. He demonstrated it without a hover, which means it was known for a while that you can get over there. The last piece of the puzzle needed for this massive time saver was the hover, where Unreal used it to soar through the air and land next to the third turret, instantly skipping the first 2 phases. This time save is somewhere in the ballpark of 3.5 minutes. Pretty massive for this category. The last one I'm going to cover for Jak 2 all missions is how the hover glitch changed the mission Drain Sewers to find statue. This is one of the most rerouted missions in the history of the game, but without going into too much detail, let's take a look at the first initial new route uploaded to Unreal's YouTube on September 1st, 2015. In order to drain the sewer, you need to spin valves in several locations to lower the water level. The first trick used for this route is pretty genius. Unreal starts off by hovering out of bounds in Haven City and then standing above the sewer door airlock. This loads in the sewer, but he remains out of bounds. Once at the bottom, the idea is essentially to make a straight beeline for the first valve. Afterwards, another hover straight to the second valve. You can see that instead of following the game's intended path through the sewers, it was now more optimal to cut corners wherever possible without the limitations of walls. The game was entering a new frontier of optimization. Jak 2 still had a good deal of balance to both any percent and all missions. The hover felt like a welcome addition to the game. While a strong tool, it wasn't so overly dominant that it became overbearing. Tons of missions were still done as intended, mainly the ones with driving and combat. But most platforming and jetboarding sections found good use with the hover. Now, it's time to take a look at Jak 3. When looking at how drastically Jak 2 changed in such a short amount of time, you would assume Jak 3 had similar potential in utilization and time save. Could it really be just as powerful? Let's find out. It's difficult to go over the exact changes the hover had for Jak 3 any percent because at the time of the discovery, the game was undergoing a bit of a renaissance. The game is split up into 3 acts. The length of each act is not perfectly split through thirds, but instead the closure to an act is the defeat of a big boss that has purpose for the progression of the plot. The any percent run for about a year or so consisted of 3 percentage warps, 2 smaller ones taking place in Act 1, and the last and biggest one being performed immediately after Act 1's closure into Act 2. Right as you take step on Haven soil. The first percentage warp, or cave skip, skipped a total of 9 missions, all the way down to destroy eggs in nest, the final mission of 2 required mission lines you have to complete. The other percentage warp is conveniently a skip to the final mission of the opposing mission tree, find Oracle in Monk Temple. A clip through a pillar at the start of Climb Monk Temple Tower allows you to skip going to the volcano entirely, appropriately named Volcano Skip. After these skips, the game was then done in an intended order all the way down until you finish Act 1, where you defeat the precursor robot. Entering Act 2, you have free roam over a small part of Haven City. One of these parts has the entrance to the Palace Ruins, where the loading zone is mysteriously active. This is one of the single biggest skips in the entire Jak series. An absolute massive percentage warp, skipping all the way from entering Act 2 down to... here. Yeah, not only is every mission in Act 2 skipped, but over half of Act 3 is skipped as well. Palace Ruins essentially marks the entrance to the point of no return missions for the game. This skip was found in 2009 and is still used to this day. The only way to find a faster percentage warp than Palace Ruins is most likely going to be a wrong warp. The aforementioned route would see a large change around the end of 2014, and surprisingly, it didn't come from the hover. It was a new percentage warp that would save around 3 to 4 minutes. Originally theorized and executed by Qatar, it was found out that if you do the clip through the pillar at the start of Climb Monk Temple Tower, continue down the staircase and do some very tight jumps while remaining out of bounds, the game has not yet figured out which version of the temple you're in. Jak visits the Monk Temple a total of 4 times. 3 times in Act 1 with Climb Monk Temple Tower, find Oracle, and complete Monk Temple tests. All the way down in Act 3, we have rescue Seam for the 4th visit. If you went back in bounds and died in a certain location, you'd be given the checkpoint for Jetboard test, the 3rd of the temple visits. This meant you could complete the mission and proceed to Ecomine, saving several minutes. This route was first executed by runner Yankee027, but lasted for an extremely short amount of time. Qatar went back to the drawing board and thought, wait, if I loaded in the state for the 3rd temple visit, is there anything stopping me from doing it to the 4th and final one? His curiosity for this question would be short-lived, as he was met with success. By going through the entire temple, avoiding cutscene triggers and more, you could open a door from the wrong side and it would warp you all the way to rescue Seam in Act 3. Temple Skip, as it would be called, now spawned in the carrier that allows you to travel back and forth between Spargus and Haven City. You then travel across Haven City and skip into Palace Ruins like before. This route would save yet another 3 to 4 minutes over the previous route. Now that all that backstory is out of the way, let's see what the hover did to further optimize and break this game for good. The world record before the hover or the new percentage warps were found was 38:48 by Raccoon1337, set in September of 2014. Once the new tricks were found, the record would get traded back and forth between Yankee and myself for a while until I landed on a time of 30:40. While earth-shattering changes to Jak 3 were happening, it was clear that the percentage warps dominated and remained the main point of discussion around late 2014, early 2015. This left the discovery of the hover glitch in the dust. Underutilized, forgotten, abandoned in the sandstorm. As the route began to settle, Yankee, Raccoon, myself, and a new runner, Hillary Puff, would begin to optimize the game to push it to the 29 stage. Yankee was the first to do so with the world's first sub-30, 29:54. This route would ultimately peak with a string of incredibly optimized times in the mid-29 minute range. I achieved 29:36 on July 21st, 2015. Hillary Puff would beat my time by 2 seconds with a 29:34 the following day on July 22nd. The day after that, July 23rd, Yankee would almost hit the ace in the hole, being 1 second shy of the record with a 29:35. The top 3 runners of the game being within a second of each other was a sign that we were now looking for every single minor shortcut or advantage we could get, and surprisingly, the hover was still almost nowhere to be found. Hillary Puff's 29:34 saw the hover being utilized only twice in the entire run. The first hover in the run is a faster method of entering Palace Ruins early. By getting on top of some rubble, you can hover through a wall to get to the first checkpoint of Palace Ruins earlier than before. If we go back to Raccoon's 38:48, the method before the hover involved one of very few proxy jumps used in the run. By getting the jetboard stuck in a particular spot, then pressing X a certain amount of times, you could launch your way into Palace Ruins. This hover was certainly a good replacement to the run, seeing as the old proxy method had varying launch heights. You could lose several seconds from being stuck falling, waiting for Jack to hit the ground. The rest of the level won't load unless Jack touches this part of the ground, so back in the day you were hoping for a lower proxy to move on with the run faster. The hover only saved about 5 to 10 seconds in this scenario. The second and final hover used in the 2934 obsoleted the final use for the light Jack wings in any percent. On the second to last mission in the game, Destroy Dark Ship, you would clear the first bridge with the jet board, then proceed to fly to the last elevator section by going through a wall. You've probably seen the hover on screen enough by now to know that the horizontal travel distance with the wings is really slow. The hover saved approximately 20 seconds over the light Jack wings method and was one of the first skips to be theorized for Jak 3 once the hover was found. Really now, is that it? Only 25 to 30 seconds? How is it possible that we have this new glitch that allows you to soar through the air and all we can find is half a minute of time save? Is this the end for Jak 3? The answer is no. Let me introduce you to Hero Mode. In the coming months after the hover's discovery, Hero Mode would give it its full welcome. Hero Mode is Jak 3's New Game Plus category. NG Plus is an unlockable video game mode available in some video games that allows the player to start a new game after they finished it at least once, where certain features in NG Plus not normally available in first playthrough are added. The upsides for this category are immediately obvious when you know what those certain features are. You begin the game with all the guns, all vehicles unlocked, and the jet board. The world record before the hover was only around 3 minutes faster than regular any percent, 35.54 by me. You could skip 2 missions at the start of the game because the vehicles were already unlocked from the start. Besides that, the run was more or less the same. As soon as the hover got found, the category had a huge spike in popularity. Not only were the new percentage warps from any percent being incorporated into Hero Mode, but the hover was booming. Unreal would once again upload a video proposing a completely new route for Hero Mode, which he claimed at the time to save upwards of 8 minutes. Yankee was the first to use this new route as well as other time saves to grind the category down through the 20s. I would eventually join the competition to land a 21.51. This route skipped all the early game missions you saw in any percent and aimed to get to the temple as fast as possible to perform temple skip. I used the same 2 hovers from any percent as well as a couple of new ones. In any percent, in order to get the checkpoint above for the temple skip, you need to do something called an ABBA bounce, a ground pound into a 3-frame X-press with little visual aid. Instead of relying on this difficult strategy, I used a hover to get me to the top. Almost immediately after, I had to use a hover to cross a big gap over to the door that triggered the percentage warp. Seeing as it took me 3 tries to get to the checkpoint just 10 seconds earlier, this was a daunting hover to hit. If I missed, I was going to the depths. It seemed that even a month or 2 later, the hover was still a struggle to perform with 100% consistency for many runners of the game, myself included. Over the course of the next few months, Yankee would find himself a new challenger to push the Hero Mode record lower, Goofy 358. They would continue to bring the category down to the 20s, where we saw even more hovers being implemented. In Yankee's 2038 that he would set sometime in June or July of 2015, the second mission, Earn First War Amulet, was now done completely different to before. The goal of the mission is to defeat 20 marauders in a small arena. You can maximum kill 15 before the first lava cycle rises up, forcing you to wait for a few seconds before the last 5 spawn in. You would intentionally leave the kill counter at 6 because the game would force you into Darkjack at 5 kills remaining. Killing the last 5 goons with Darkjack is far slower than using your weapons, so avoiding the transformation is intentional. After defeating the marauders, the endpoint for the level is waiting atop a long elevator ride. In Yankee's 2038, he would once again leave the kill counter at 6, but hover up to the top where the end mission trigger is. He would shoot a gyrobuster shot, followed by a nuke, wiping out all enemies, skipping the elevator ride completely. This is still used in runs today. In January of 2016, a bit over a year after the hover was discovered, Goofy would push hero mode into a new era, entering the 19-minute barrier for the first time in history. His 1930 from January 10th showed impressive and technically demanding hovers for the time. You could now skip the very first mission of the game in hero mode by hovering out of the arena. This despawned the required collectible tokens for the tutorial. Once you die out of bounds, you spawn at the end where the last token would be, skipping all the platforming and collecting of the tokens. This was an extremely tight hover and caused many resets. Luckily, it was right at the start. This was also later further improved upon when we discovered that hovering out to the left side is a shorter distance, thus faster. Another impressive hover Goofy utilized in his 1930 is the infamous Ocean Hover. This only saved around 5 seconds, but the category was now so short that Goofy was looking to incorporate everything he could. On top of all vehicles unlocked, all guns, and the jetboard, hero mode offered unlockable secrets that you can start with entering a new game, such as unlimited vehicle turbos and most people's favorite, turbo jetboard in desert. When the secret is on, you will gradually speed up when jetboarding on the sand in the desert. This allowed Goofy to soar across the ocean, landing near the temple entrance. Difficult execution for the time and one of the longer hovers in the run, requiring you to hit 2 loading triggers while going through the air. Goofy would also use a skip we see today, but was very difficult for the time. A hover straight from the temple out of bounds portion to the checkpoint used for temple skip. Only a year apart, and the skill level for the game is clear as day. It took me 3 slow and lengthy tries to line up a hover to get to the checkpoint. Now Goofy goes at full speed from out of bounds and knows exactly where he's landing. It's safe to say that runners were getting comfortable. Once Haven City was entered, Goofy used the jetboard a lot more now to set up death warps with the hover instead of using the standard zoomer. These smaller time saves add up over time. As you can see, hero mode found extremely good use for this glitch. While it's not the multiple minutes saved like in Jak 2, 20 seconds here, 30 seconds there, eventually adds up to a couple minutes, which is quite a lot for a 20-minute category. Safe to say as well, the hover made Jak 3 hero mode harder. A lot harder. There could be arguments made for both Jak 2's categories becoming easier after the hover, but for Jak 3 hero mode, the undeniable opinion was that it was now brutal. Almost every hover in the run now had some sort of risk involved, but that's the way it goes when you strive for perfection. The constant chaos going on in Haven City would make the game quite laggy, causing you to drop hovers in the city on the occasion. The temple hover from out of bounds, the ocean hover, and the 2 hovers right at the start of the run certainly don't make the run any easier. 20 minutes of pain. But with pain comes gain. This now brings me to the last category. Jak 3 All Missions. I apologize if you feel that I may have been bringing up myself a lot in this video. It's not my intention to do so, I just happened to be a part of the competition as the hover was discovered. If you're tired of listening to me talk about myself, I'm sorry, but this next part is almost entirely me. Unsatisfied with how much of the game's content was cut from any percent in hero mode, I always saw all missions as a category that was dear to me. Even way back when it was far more unoptimized, I enjoyed it a lot, and when the hover was discovered, nobody seemed to give a damn about it. I felt it was one of the best categories the game had to offer, yet nobody wanted to play it. Perhaps the 3-hour length discouraged people from learning and running it. Perhaps the run felt too challenging due to the amount of difficult missions later in the game. In any case, if nobody was gonna do it, I had to put the gloves on and get to work. The most up-to-date run before the discovery of the hover glitch was my 3:17:17 from, funny enough, July 4th of 2014. This was a PB and world record by 5 minutes, but most of my time saves were gold and my attempt counter was pretty weak. Any percent in hero mode were clearly the flavor of the month categories in January 2015. Quite literally everybody was playing them. Except for me. I was going to embark on a journey. My goal was to concoct a new route for Jak 3 All Missions. This time, I had the hover at my disposal. My element has always been grinding runs and achieving times. Routing was never my strong suit. Although I got some help, this was mostly going to be a one-man job. This time, I had to think outside the box if I wanted the best for the category I loved. Armed with my new route that I would develop in January, I would achieve 306.41 and 306.16. The videos don't exist today, but were kept track of in an old pace bin. I'd be back at it again in June. The split said that I achieved a 305.02 somewhere around this time, but I would quickly improve it with the run you're currently watching to 3 hours 9 seconds. On June 24th, 2015, I would finally hit my goal, smashing the sub 3 barrier. 256.22 was the time, and I was satisfied.
Yeah, man, 256.22. Fuck yeah, that's sub 3 if I've ever seen one. Yes! Now that's what I'm talking about, man. That's what I'm fucking talking about, man.
The jetboard for Jak 3 all missions is achieved after the Defend Ashland mission. This is around 50 minutes into the run. The mission immediately after obtaining the jetboard, complete Monk Temple tests, would be a completely different mission. In the circular room in the center of the temple, there's conveniently a hole at the top. This can be used to hover through all the way to the rotator section that you might recognize from hero mode. This skipped the entire token room and subsequently the Lightjack freeze power-up. All in all, about a minute was gained here. On Escort Bomb Train, you're supposed to shoot a bunch with the beam reflexor gun to hit targets that will lower a full train track to the end. The mission ends when all the tracks are lowered, not when the timer runs out. The strategy before consisted of hitting all the early targets, then most of the middle targets, as well as some of the late targets from this exact location. Since you can bounce the beam reflexor shots off the walls, now few train tracks remained. You would proceed further into the level and get the last couple of tracks around the midsection to end the mission. While I put in effort into rerouting the entire game, one mind can't do it all alone. Originally theorized by Dex and Guitar, if you get the first targets, go down the first ramp, then hover over the mountains to the midsection and work your way backwards, you could save some time. The route itself wasn't the majority of the time saved though. If you ended the mission in the bottommost section of the eco mine, the elevator on the way to the next mission would be at the bottom. This saves around 10 to 15 seconds since Jak is forced to wait in place until the elevator's full animation of going down is finished. This route is still used today, and the hover is certainly the most tricky part for sure. Mostly due to the bumpy terrain you have to initiate the hover on. You can even hear me praying to get it in my run.
Come on baby, come on baby, come on baby, come on baby.
The 3 sewer missions are some of the hardest missions in the run due to the precise hovers that were incorporated. Despite the fact that they're placed far apart through the game's story, let's cover them all here. Sewers 1 has a particularly difficult hover that skips a small part of the end of the level. You have to go down a water slide and hit a very precise angle to go through the top part of the wall. You also have to start the hover from far enough back since the game has a trigger that forces you off the jetboard when you reach the bottom of the slide. Sewers 2 had a hover straight from the beginning of the mission that skips a big platforming segment where you avoid gas coming out of pipes. You can't skip the whole level with this one since the rest of the level doesn't load unless you land in a certain area. Sewers 3 has a hover from the last section to the end. Once again, pretty difficult stuff for the time. You have to go through the ceiling, and if you're just the slightest bit off, one of several things can happen. You can go too high, usually meaning you'll hit the lamp, killing all your momentum. You can go too far left and you'll probably clip, but some collision slightly past the wall will bounce your hover in a weird direction that isn't towards the exit. We've come a long way from lining it up safely to where we are now. In my current all missions PB, you can see me going for this hover blindly with little to no setup. Right after the second sewer mission, I would argue the hardest mission of the run kicks in. Dark Eco Tanks. This mission has you destroy 5 eco tanks that are on top of some platforms in the middle of a gooey mess of an area. The terrain is difficult to jetboard on, the enemies are hard to see and camouflaged with the environment, and the hovers were on another level. The first one in particular is difficult because you need to clear a wall without hovering too fast, otherwise the hover will drop you to the ground. Before, I would kinda just do the mission as intended and climb the towers using the second red gun for height. In my 256.22, you can see early implementations of drive-by hovers, which are sick by the way. They didn't go successfully in my run, but they were a neat idea for the time. If you press circle while on the jetboard, you can shoot a few blue waves out from the jetboard itself. The range is pretty short, so the idea is to hit circle right as you're hovering by one of the tanks, sniping in midair. The terrain is so hard to jetboard on that once you're hovering, you're committed, and often you're not going in the right direction. This mission is just a huge mixed bag with recovery strats and on-the-fly thinking. One of the hardest for sure, no matter how many times you practice it. One unfortunate use I found for the hover was skipping all of War Factory. Not that you played it much before anyway, but the old method was super cool. Here's how it worked. The goal of the mission is to get to a red vehicle that can drive into some breakable walls until you reach the last elevator. Getting to the vehicle took a while, having you play as Daxter multiple times to help Jack cross gaps. That part of the level is almost entirely skipped by going through a metal ceiling at the start of the mission, using a combination of jumps from the second red gun, the wave concussor. Then you would get to the car and drive it into this part of the conveyor belt. You would then ground pound on the nose of the car until Jack got a high enough launch to land on a spot out of bounds, where you could then jump and shoot the red gun a couple times until you reach the last elevator. It's pretty sick. Now let me show you the new way. Yeah, a bit of a downgrade, huh? But hey, that's what happens with this kind of stuff. Some things are upgraded and some things are downgraded. This hover method probably saved a solid 20 seconds over the car bounce method. One of the last missions in the run has a huge use for the hover glitch, Destroy Metalhead Tower. There really isn't much explaining that needs to be done other than it's a giant ascent to the top where enemies await that you need to defeat. You can't hover straight up to the top because yet again, there's a loading trigger you need to hit. Pretty massive time save though, even if it's only to the first loading zone. Before you had to use Infinite Flight Glitch, which was a pretty lackluster and slow method of gaining height. The hover probably saved somewhere in the ballpark of 20 to 30 seconds here. The first initial hover discovery saw all missions be lowered by over 20 minutes. From 3:17:17 to almost a full year later ending up at 2:56:22. I can contribute a lot of this time saved to my old 3:17 just being really sloppy. But the hover certainly contributed in breaking the 3-hour barrier. After all, we're still looking at somewhere in the range of 5 to 8 minutes of time saved from one discovery alone. Unreal changed the name of the game on October 16th, 2014. I think the hover perfectly marked the end of an era for both games as we saw many older runners fade away from the games, but also many new faces that probably saw the hover in YouTube videos and thought, wow, that's so cool, I want to do that. Tom Jack's 113 in Jak 2 and Raccoon's 38 were seen in the community as peak performance for the games. It's only fitting that when things were stale, a new discovery was at hand. A means to revive the competition, a means to bring new life into games that were starting to succeed the age of 10. Hate it or love it, the hover glitch is almost universally viewed as classic. When you think of Melee, you think of Fox. When you think of Half-Life, you think of bunny hopping. And when you think of Jak, if you didn't think of it before, you certainly will now be thinking of a flapping jetboard soaring through the sky. The hover, after its first initial year, meaning roughly start of 2016 till now, started taking over. Many city death warps started being found for all the game's categories, like the ones we saw in Jak 3 Hero Mode. This means less zoomer travel and more jetboarding and hovering, which is welcome in my book. Hovers are essentially used everywhere to save 5, 2, or even 1 second sometimes. Runners are so used to the hover that failing it in runs is now almost a surprise. The consistency has risen to almost 100% efficiency amongst top runners. It's a staple, and new hovers are still being found to this day that help save time in the games. After all these years of being in the community, it's awesome to see that we're still growing and we're still trying to find ways to lower these games. I'm so confident that I bet a new hover is in the works as you're watching this. And that is it for today. The fine people shown on screen in the Jak community helped me tremendously in fact-checking and correcting the script since my memory on a lot of the stuff is pretty foggy. This is also why I haven't uploaded in a while. I wanted to make sure everything was well written before I posted it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe as there is more history and lore coming to this channel very soon. I recently hit 20,000 subscribers, which is the first time since 2013 that my YouTube has overtaken my Twitch in terms of followers. Never thought I'd see that. It's all, of course, thanks to you guys. I also want to give a thank you to my new and returning patrons for the support. These videos would not be possible to create without you all. If you wish to support me, you can chip in minimum $2 per month to get your name in at the end of my next video. But of course, no pressure. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video. There will be more coming soon. Take care, and have a good one.